Jeff Beck was one of the most innovative guitarists in rock history, a man who could make his six-string instrument sound like an entire orchestra. His genius was undeniable, but it came with a heavy cost. Beck was a perfectionist of the highest order, someone who couldn't tolerate what he saw as musical compromise, artistic fraud, or musicians who sold out their talent for commercial success. Throughout his career, Beck developed a reputation for having impossibly high standards. These standards put him in conflict with many famous bands and musicians who chose popularity over what Beck considered true artistic progress. His conflicts weren't just about different musical styles or approaches. They ran much deeper than that, touching on fundamental questions about what guitar music should accomplish and what it meant to be an authentic musician. Beck once told a journalist in 1978 that most guitarists play what's expected, but he played what was necessary, even if nobody understood it at the time. This philosophy put him at odds with countless musicians who chose the safe path of commercial success over the risky road of genuine innovation. From studio trickery that masked poor musicianship to formulaic compositions designed to sell records rather than push boundaries, Beck's disgust with certain bands revealed a man who valued artistic integrity above everything else, including money and peer approval. These musical feuds offer a fascinating window into the mind of one of rock's most demanding perfectionists. When Jeff Beck decided that a band was musically bankrupt, he had both the technical skills to prove his point and the artistic credibility to make his criticism stick. His rivalries reveal not just his own values, but also the tensions that existed in rock music between artistic purity and commercial success. Boston, the studio magic controversy. Beck's conflict. With Boston exposed his purist musical philosophy. His disdain for Tom Scholz's multi-platinum band wasn't based on their melodies or even their success. Instead, Beck was disgusted by what he saw as studio wizardry being used to mask fundamental musical inadequacies that would become obvious the moment the band tried to perform live. The irritation reportedly began in 1976 when Boston's debut album dominated radio stations across America with its heavily layered guitar sound. The album was a massive commercial success, but Beck saw something troubling in how that success was achieved. According to Bob Ezrin, a former producer at Epic Records, Beck listened to the Boston album once and immediately understood what bothered him about it. Beck told Ezrin that this was what happened when engineers became more important than musicians, creating what he called a beautiful lie that would fall apart under live performance conditions. What truly bothered Beck wasn't Boston's commercial success, but their methods for achieving it. While Beck was pushing his instruments to their absolute limits through pure technique and innovative playing approaches, Boston was achieving massive sales through what Beck saw as technological crutches and studio magic that compensated for limited actual musical ability. Beck believed that real guitar work should be reproducible on stage without needing a team of technicians to make it sound good. In a 1977 interview with Guitar Player magazine, Beck expressed his belief that authentic musicianship couldn't depend on production tricks. He felt that if you couldn't perform your music live with the same power and precision as your recorded version, then you weren't really a musician in the truest sense. The philosophical gap between Beck and Boston widened when both artists were being compared as guitar innovators. At a 1978 industry conference, witnesses claimed that Beck refused to participate in a panel discussion that included Scholz. Beck later told the organizers that he didn't debate music with people who confused engineering with artistry. Interestingly, Tom Scholz seemed unaware of Beck's harsh criticism. In later interviews, Scholz actually praised Beck's technical abilities and spoke respectfully of his innovations. But for Beck, Boston represented everything that was wrong with modern rock music. They prioritized commercial appeal over musical authenticity and hid behind technology instead of developing genuine instrumental mastery. In Beck's view, they were successful frauds who had convinced the public that studio manipulation was the same thing as musical talent. Foreigner calculated commercialism. Beck's disgust with Foreigner revealed his deep contempt for what he saw as calculated commercialism in rock music. His feelings toward Mick Jones and the band weren't about their chart performance or even their musical competence. Instead, Beck was disappointed to watch a fellow British musician abandon artistic exploration for what he viewed as shameless manipulation of the American market. The disappointment reportedly reached its peak in 1977 when Foreigner's debut album achieved massive success in the United States through radio-friendly arrangements that seemed designed purely for commercial appeal. Jerry Greenberg, a former executive at Atlantic Records, recalled that Beck studied Foreigner's approach with growing dismay. Beck told Greenberg that Mick Jones had taken everything dangerous about rock music and made it safe for suburban consumption. In Beck's view, this was musical betrayal disguised as international success. What disgusted Beck wasn't Foreigner's professionalism, or even their musical skills, but their predictability. While Beck was constantly experimenting with unconventional techniques and refusing to repeat himself artistically, Foreigner was achieving platinum status through what Beck called assembly line rock music. He saw their songs as corporate anthems designed by focus groups rather than genuine artistic inspiration. In a 1979 interview with Circus magazine, Beck argued that true musicians should follow their instincts, not market research. He saw Foreigner's calculated approach to songwriting as fundamentally dishonest, a betrayal of what rock music was supposed to represent. The contempt deepened when both artists were touring American arenas at the same time in 1980. At a backstage encounter, witnesses claimed that Beck completely avoided Mick Jones, later explaining to his crew that he wouldn't validate someone who had turned rock rebellion into office work. This comment perfectly captured Beck's view of what Foreigner represented: the transformation of rock music from a form of artistic rebellion into a business enterprise. Mick Jones seemed genuinely puzzled by Beck's coldness toward him. In later interviews, Jones called Beck incredibly talented but difficult, apparently not understanding the philosophical objections that Beck had to Foreigner's approach to music. For Beck, Foreigner represented what he saw as artistic prostitution. He was particularly disappointed that British musicians like Jones were abandoning their creative heritage to manufacture American-style entertainment that prioritized commercial success over musical integrity and innovation. In Beck's worldview, this was a betrayal not just of artistic principles, but of cultural identity. Journey, the technology takeover. Beck's frustration with Journey revealed his deep anxiety about technology's growing role in rock music. His problem with the San Francisco band wasn't about Neil Schon's guitar skills, which Beck acknowledged were considerable. Instead, Beck was alarmed to watch synthesizers and keyboards gradually dominate musical arrangements in places where guitar should have remained the primary voice. The concern reportedly escalated in 1981 when Journey's Escape album showcased Jonathan Cain's keyboard-heavy productions. Roy Haley, a former engineer at Columbia Records, recalled that Beck analyzed Journey's sound obsessively. Beck told Haley that the band was pushing guitar into the background to make room for machines. While he acknowledged that Neil Schon was a capable player, Beck felt that Schon was allowing computers to steal his spotlight. What alarmed Beck wasn't Journey's commercial achievement, but what he saw as their instrumental hierarchy. While Beck was developing new guitar techniques to expand the instrument's expressive range, Journey was achieving arena dominance through what Beck called synthesizer dependency. He felt that their electronic arrangements treated guitar like a supporting actor instead of the star of the show. In a 1982 interview with International Musician, Beck expressed his fears about technology displacing human musicianship. He argued that guitar had built rock music, and now bands were replacing it with programmed sounds. This wasn't just about musical preference for Beck. It represented a fundamental threat to the nature of rock music itself. Beck's anxiety intensified when other rock bands began copying Journey's keyboard-dominated approach. At a 1983 Music Equipment Expo, witnesses claimed that Beck walked out during a synthesizer demonstration. He later told his guitar technician that if musicians stopped believing in their instruments, that the instruments would stop believing in them. This almost mystical view of the relationship between musician and instrument was central to Beck's musical philosophy. Neil Schon seemed unaware of Beck's concerns about Journey's direction. In interviews, Schon expressed genuine admiration for Beck's innovative techniques and spoke respectfully of his contributions to guitar music. But for Beck, Journey represented a dangerous precedent in rock music. He saw them as allowing electronic convenience to replace the physical challenge and emotional directness that made guitar music genuinely powerful and irreplaceable. Beck's concern about Journey reflected broader anxieties about technology's role in music during the early 1980s. He feared that the increasing use of synthesizers and electronic instruments would lead to a decline in the importance of traditional musicianship and the loss of rock music's essential human element. Yes, academic excess, Beck's battle with the progressive rock band. Yes, represented one of his most intellectually charged conflicts. His criticism of Steve Howe and the other members wasn't about their undeniable technical abilities. Instead, Beck was frustrated to watch these skilled musicians turn guitar playing into what he saw as an academic exercise that prioritized theoretical complexity over emotional communication. The philosophical clash reportedly intensified throughout the early 1970s, when Yes was being widely praised for their intricate compositions and sophisticated musical arrangements. Eddie Offord, a former producer at Atlantic Records, recalled that Beck attended a Yes concert during this period and left during the second song. Beck later told Offord that the band members were playing music like they were solving mathematical equations. He wanted to know where the soul was, where the instinct was that made guitar playing fundamentally human. What frustrated Beck wasn't Yes's skill level, which he acknowledged was impressive, but their approach to musicianship. While Beck was channeling raw emotion through innovative techniques that came from intuitive exploration, Yes was achieving critical acclaim through what Beck called scholarly showmanship. He saw their compositions as sounding like conservatory exercises rather than genuine rock and roll expression. In a 1973 interview with Melody Maker, Beck defended his belief that music should come from the gut, not from textbooks. He felt that technical virtuosity meant nothing without emotional authenticity. This wasn't anti-intellectual prejudice on Beck's part. Rather, it reflected his belief that rock music's power came from its emotional directness and spontaneity. The philosophical divide between Beck and Yes became unbridgeable when progressive rock fans began elevating complex musical arrangements over passionate performance. Beck saw this as a fundamental misunderstanding of what made rock music powerful and meaningful. In his view, the growing emphasis on technical complexity was causing musicians to lose sight of music's emotional core. Steve Howe seemed genuinely respectful of Beck's innovations and contributions to guitar music. In later interviews, Howe called Beck inspirational and spoke admiringly of his technical breakthroughs. But for Beck, Yes represented what he saw as the death of rock's primal power. He felt that they were replacing spontaneous emotional expression with calculated intellectual demonstrations that might impress people's minds, but left their souls completely untouched. This conflict reflected broader tensions within rock music during the 1970s between musicians who emphasized technical sophistication and those who prioritized emotional authenticity. Beck firmly placed himself in the latter camp, believing that no amount of mechanical skill could compensate for a lack of genuine feeling. Pink Floyd. Atmospheric disappointment. Beck's resentment toward Pink Floyd represented his most personal artistic grievance. His frustration with David Gilmour and the band wasn't about their creativity or innovation, which he acknowledged. Instead, Beck was disappointed to watch guitar technique become secondary to mood and atmosphere, and to see individual brilliance dissolve into collective soundscapes that buried virtuosity beneath conceptual ideas. The frustration reportedly deepened throughout the mid-1970s when Pink Floyd's conceptual albums were overshadowing more guitar-focused rock music. Malcolm Jones, a former executive at Harvest Records, recalled that Beck studied Pink Floyd's approach with increasing irritation. Beck told Jones that David Gilmour had serious musical skills, but he was hiding them behind atmospheric nonsense. Beck believed that guitar should lead musical arrangements, not provide background texture for philosophical concepts. What annoyed Beck wasn't Pink Floyd's innovation or their success, but their priorities as musicians. While Beck was pushing guitar technique into uncharted territories through solo showcases and instrumental exploration, Pink Floyd was achieving legendary status through what Beck called using guitar as wallpaper. He felt that they were sacrificing individual talent for what he dismissively termed group meditation sessions. In a 1975 interview with Guitar World, Beck defended his belief that great guitarists should be heard clearly, not dissolved into what he called conceptual soup. He felt that instrumental mastery deserved spotlight recognition rather than atmospheric integration. This wasn't simply ego on Beck's part. It reflected his fundamental belief about the role of virtuosity in rock music. The artistic philosophy gap between Beck and Pink Floyd became permanent when music critics began praising Pink Floyd's restraint over Beck's technical displays. Beck found this deeply frustrating because he felt that critics were valuing conceptual sophistication over musical skill and individual achievement. David Gilmour seemed unaware of Beck's hostility toward Pink Floyd's approach. In interviews, Gilmour expressed genuine admiration for Beck's technical innovations and spoke respectfully of his contributions to guitar music. But for Beck, Pink Floyd represented wasted potential. He saw them as brilliant musicians who were choosing to hide their abilities behind conceptual pretensions instead of celebrating individual instrumental excellence. This conflict revealed Beck's belief that rock music's power came from the display of individual virtuosity rather than collective atmospheric creation. While many critics and fans appreciated Pink Floyd's ability to create immersive sonic experiences, Beck felt that this approach diminished the importance of individual musical achievement and technical mastery. Led Zeppelin, the ultimate betrayal. Beck's fury toward Led Zeppelin represented the most explosive and personal betrayal in his entire career. The legendary rock band reportedly earned Beck's ultimate rage in what became the most bitter conflict in guitar history. For Beck, this wasn't just about musical differences or artistic philosophies. It was about theft of his creative legacy. The Devi. A station reportedly began in 1969 when Led Zeppelin's debut album achieved massive success using techniques that Beck claimed to have pioneered during his time with the Yardbirds. Peter Grant, who had been a manager in the rock music industry, recalled that Beck watched Led Zeppelin's rise with growing rage. Beck told Grant that Jimmy Page had taken everything he had developed during his experimental period and marketed it as his own innovation. Beck felt that Page had built an entire career on Beck's experimental work, while getting credit for inventing techniques that Beck had actually created. What destroyed Beck emotionally wasn't Led Zeppelin's musical ability, which he acknowledged was considerable, but what he saw as the theft of his artistic legacy. While Beck had spent years developing revolutionary guitar approaches during his brief but influential tenure with the Yardbirds, Led Zeppelin was achieving worldwide domination through what Beck called stolen innovations. He felt that his techniques had been repackaged for mass consumption without any acknowledgement of their true source. This wasn't simply professional jealousy on Beck's part. Beck genuinely believed that many of the guitar techniques that made Led Zeppelin famous had originated from his experimental work with the Yardbirds. He felt that Page had observed his innovations, learned from them, and then presented them to the world as original creations. For an artist as concerned with innovation and authenticity as Beck, this represented the ultimate artistic injustice. Jimmy Page remained diplomatically silent about Beck's accusations throughout his career. Page never publicly responded to Beck's claims about stolen techniques or acknowledged any debt to Beck's earlier experimental work. This silence likely frustrated Beck even more, as it meant that his version of events would never be officially confirmed or denied. For Beck, Led Zeppelin represented the ultimate artistic injustice in the music industry. He was forced to watch his experimental breakthroughs become someone else's legendary reputation, while he remained credited as merely talented rather than genuinely revolutionary. This was particularly painful for Beck because he had always prioritized innovation over commercial success, only to see what he considered his innovations achieve massive commercial success under someone else's name. The Led Zeppelin conflict encapsulated all of Beck's frustrations with the music industry. Here was a band that had achieved everything that Beck had sacrificed for the sake of artistic purity: massive commercial success, critical acclaim, and recognition as innovators. Yet Beck believed that their innovations were actually his, stolen and repackaged without acknowledgement. It represented the ultimate failure of the music industry to recognize and reward true innovation over successful marketing and presentation. Conclusion. Jeff Beck's musical rivalries reveal a complex artist who was simultaneously admired and alienated by his uncompromising standards. His conflicts with these six bands weren't simply matters of personal taste or professional jealousy. They reflected fundamental disagreements about what music should accomplish and what it meant to be an authentic artist in the rock music industry. Whether Beck was protecting genuine innovation or was consumed by jealousy remains a matter of interpretation. His supporters would argue that he was defending artistic integrity against commercial compromise and calling attention to the difference between genuine innovation and successful marketing. His critics might suggest that his perfectionism had become so extreme that it prevented him from appreciating different but equally valid approaches to making music. What's undeniable is that Beck's conflicts reveal the tensions that existed in rock music between artistic purity and commercial success, between individual virtuosity and collective achievement, and between innovation and accessibility. His rivalries offer a fascinating glimpse into the mind of one of rock's most demanding perfectionists, and raise important questions about authenticity, creativity, and recognition in the music industry. These feuds also demonstrate how even musical geniuses can nurse bitter grudges, and how artistic differences can become deeply personal conflicts. Beck's story serves as both an inspiration for uncompromising artistic vision and a cautionary tale about the costs of perfectionism in a collaborative and commercial art form like rock music.